Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Varano. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on this episode, we're talking with Joy Langley, who's not only an author of the book Navigating Stress, but she's also an emotional intelligence expert. And this conversation, I had so much fun with this. She's a joy. What else can I say? But also, she talked about turning stress into your strength. And I think that's so valuable. And I think this conversation has so many pearls. So maybe you're not dealing with stress right now, but you know somebody that is. This is a great episode for you to listen to. So let's jump into it. Joy, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to our conversation. One is that the book that you wrote, Navigating Stress, I think is so relevant right now as a titled book, but also as I was reading your bio that you sent to me, one of the things that I loved reading was this idea of turning your stress into your strength. And I don't think we do that enough in how we actually navigate stress. And I thought that would be a great direction for us to go in this conversation. I'd love really to start off with your input on how did you go about writing this book, Navigating Stress?
Right. Yes, it was lovely to be invited to write the book. And I wanted it to be very basic. I didn't want it to be complicated. There are too many complicated things in life, and understanding stress is a necessity. Anxiety and depression are very real human emotions. And I've been through the sort of depression side of things myself. And I understood what depression was from a very personal perspective. And I've kind of used a lot of that later on in life to remind myself, I'm never going to do anything again in my life that I don't like, simply because for me, it creates depression. But depression is a very, very powerful emotion that tells you that what you're doing in that moment is not bringing you, literally my name, any joy. It just isn't.
Yeah.
So there were a signal that we could create within the body to tell you that, Patrick. Yeah. That is it. Joy, you get very miserable, you get low, you don't want to see anybody, you eat a lot of chocolates, you don't want to be here. And the worst feeling, Patrick, was the desire to take my own life. And I don't think I ever voiced it in that way. But I do remember standing on the train platform in London, the London Underground, and thinking, ooh, the next train that comes along. And that's a pretty dark thought, which people don't share the depth that they go to. I knew that I cannot ever be that depressed again in my life, if I can help it.
It's so powerful to hear you recount that, because I will tell you, I've had several guests on this show that have shared a similar type of story, that they feel fortunate that they didn't act on what they were thinking about. And your revelation in terms of, I'm not going to do anything that I don't feel brings joy to me anymore, I think is just so powerful as well. And if you think about it, if more people took that, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing now. Because if you just look at some of the data out there, most people are unhappy in their roles in what they do. And I'm in the similar situation in that I left a job that I was completely miserable at. And if it wasn't for leaving, I don't know where I'd be. I was just career-wise very unhappy place. Didn't feel like that I had any purpose to what I was doing.
The thing is, Patrick, though, as a teenager, sort of like moving into adulthood, nobody tells you really where you're meant to be heading. I mean, people tell you what you could do because you haven't got a clue. So they say, oh, perhaps you should be a doctor, Joy. Perhaps you should be a lawyer. My parents are Jamaican, so they have high flying ideas for their kids, a bit like a lot of immigrants that come to the UK. They want their children to do really well. So their idea of someone who is doing something is in a professional capacity. So they had nurses, doctors, lawyers, And I got the Asian community over here, dentists, you want the top jobs. So my parents' idea of where I should be, I'm not sure I lived up to their expectations. I got a degree, which was good, but I didn't become any of the grand titles that they wanted. But no one tells you, Patrick, what are you supposed to do with your life? Follow your passions, do what makes you happy. What hobbies do you love as a teenager? Go into that. But I didn't have any major burning ambitions. So I just fell into going to university just to try and stave off getting a job, be quite honest, Patrick.
What's interesting, though, is in your bio that I read, you became a self-help sort of addict, for lack of a better term, right? You loved it. And to me, that has probably created your purpose now of feeling as though you're in a helping profession. That's what you do now.
Yeah. And I don't know if I was ever going. I mean, if you told me when I was 20 something that I would get into therapy and become a coach, I would say, well, no way. I was a very selfish person, very self-centered, Patrick. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, she says. I was a bit of a party animal. So I thought after finishing university really and having such clear guidance in life and all the guardrails are up, having them off once you leave and this world and suddenly becomes so vast, I thought, what am I supposed to do with my life? So I just became a hedonist and I just thought, yes, fun, out every night, drink, be with my friends. And that got boring after a while. But I really didn't know what I was meant to do with my life. And without having any major activities that I liked or hobbies, I was lost, completely lost, making it up as I went along.
As a lot of people do. As it relates specifically to the stress component, certainly I've seen it more in the work that I do, that there is just this heightened level of stress out there, or we talk about it in terms of lack of resilience that people have. And I'm curious from your perspective, do you see a difference between managing stress and developing resilience? Are they similar? Are they different? How do you decipher those?
They are connected. They're connected. They're part of the same family. So for me, stress, people have to understand that it's a very necessary thing that the body does. Okay, so we hear a lot about fight and flight, and people say it, but perhaps they don't really understand it. We hear a lot about the hormones that get generated, adrenaline makes you really happy. Yeah, get more of that in your body, do some exercise, get some adrenaline. But no one understands that the body, when there is a problem about to happen, when it's frightened, it will generate a chemical to help you to run, to fight, to do what you need to in that moment. And stress is the response that the body has. And when the activity is gone, when the fear, when the fright, when the terrible thing has subsided, when the animal hasn't eaten you, then your body goes back to normal. And the thing with human beings is that we have a big brain, and unfortunately, we can't let things go. So there's a really good book that I like the title of. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Yeah. And I thought, what a brilliant title. The book was hard to read, but I get through books. I sort of read chapters and I stop. But the title grabbed me and I thought, yeah, why don't zebras have ulcers? But it's looking at the idea that animals, if they were drinking some water and then suddenly this lion appeared, they'd run. They'd have that stress response. They'd run, but they'd come back to the water and have a drink and they'd forgotten about it. But human beings, we don't forget. So we have a memory and it's going to say, ooh, the last time I was down by that water hole, there was a lion. And so we hold on to that. So that in itself then it sets us up for being afraid of things. It sets us up for phobias. It just sets us up for then being anxious. So anxiety is another part of the family, which is if you are walking down a dark alley and you hear a noise, I want you to feel anxious. Have a look around, see what's there. And then I want your stress response to kick in if you have to run or if you have to fight, whatever it might be. So fight and flight, people talk about that a lot. And also the other thing is freeze. I mean, I think I am a person that goes into freeze mode, Patrick, which is act like a tree. And I really feel frozen on the spot. Like I could just be sat, you could think I was a statue. You'd walk past and say, Joy, I can see you. I wouldn't answer you. I'd be looking like a tree. So because I'm not a fighter, but I think I do it when I need to. And flee, people avoid and they escape. Very, very human, natural responses. Fight or flight, explained. So stress is normal. People have blown it really out of proportion, thinking that they should eliminate it. And that's because they don't understand and they don't go into the mechanics of it. And they moved far too quickly on to then talking about burnout and talking about you dying. So it puts the fear of God into you, basically, about something that's human. You have to breathe. You have to have stress. You have to have the stress response. So my job in the book, actually, Patrick, was to kind of redress that whole scaremongering and stress is bad for you and stress can kill you. I mean, when people talk like that, that makes me stressed, to be quite honest.
I have to chuckle when you were talking about the freeze part, because what I think about with freeze is workshops that I've done, and especially if I'm talking about this subject, is that there are those people in workshops that their mechanism is to freeze when there's a question that's going to be asked. And they're like, if I don't look at him, if I don't make eye contact, maybe he won't even know I'm here. It will just go right by me.
That is me, Patrick, every single time. And it never fails to surprise me if I'm in a group, okay? It doesn't matter if it's 3 people, 4, 5, whatever it might be, when they sort of say, let's introduce yourselves, you think, oh, SHI and other stuff. And as it moves around the room, you can feel your heart rate going up. You think it's getting closer to me, closer to me. Oh my God, last person's just spoken, the next, and then it's you. It's like lights, camera, action. And you think, wow. And I can feel my heart about to jump out of my chest half the time. But that is the fear response. Fear creating stress in my body. My body's deciding it has to do something. It thinks it's in danger. It wants to run. It wants to do something, but I have to sit there and just suck it up. So that's the fear response that you said. The heaviness hangs in the air in offices, is that we all have that triggered in us because it's a very ancient biological response. We're never going to get rid of it. It's there. Yet when we want to run because something's happened in the office, we have to stand there. And you can imagine how stressful that is.
Yeah.
If you have to stand there when actually every fiber in your body is saying run, like your life depended on it.
Right.
And very small things are triggering that, Patrick. Very, very tiny things, like just having to speak to the boss. One of your co-workers has annoyed you, or something hasn't turned up on time. Just read a horrible email or sent an email and there's a mistake in it. There are just so many tiny micro activities that will trigger the stress response. So that's why understanding it is key. You do have to understand this thing that's just happened to my body. My heart's now pounding at 100 miles an hour. My stomach is churning. I think I feel as I'm going to be sick. Oh dear. I feel an awful lot of tension in my shoulders. Ooh, my hands are really sweaty. I'm going to say, yeah, that's normal.
But along those lines is what somebody said to me in the office. My brain still perceives it as a threat, right? My brain doesn't know the difference between that threat and the saber-toothed tiger that used to run after me. And isn't that really the problem for us today, is that we activate a system that really was meant for fight, flight, or freeze to save our lives. And it's just inundated all the time because of the things that we put in front of it, that we don't sort of take the time to say, this isn't a real emergency. This due date on this project is not the saber-toothed tiger that's going to kill me. Even if you think it do. It will.
You're so right. And I love that saber-toothed tiger. I'm sure they did exist. I'm glad I wasn't around when they were around, Patrick. But yes, if one was in front of me, I would want to run like crazy. And I had a client once and he said to me that, Joy, you know what? Because I think he read the book and he said, Joy, I love the book and everything else. And he goes, and he's reading another book at the same time. He said, every time anything triggers it, I think I'm being chased by a tiger. And I think, yeah, you're so right. And I thought, yeah, tiger. And then being chased by a deadline, as in DEADLINE for work. But yeah, your body thinks there's a real emergency about to happen.
Yeah.
And it responds accordingly. As I said, don't knock the beauty of the way in which our body's been built. Because if me and you were to sit down and create the perfect human being, Patrick, we'd say, how can we make sure when this particular organism is in danger, that it protects itself and saves its life so that it can be there to fight another day? And we might say, ooh, I don't know. We could just poke it with a stick. Ooh, we could put some fire under its feet. Ooh, let's put this hormone inside their body, which when it thinks it's in danger, between the brain and the body, they say, move like crazy. Get those arms pumping, get those legs pumping, get out of here.
So we had a conversation before the recording started about the various forms of sort of activities that we can do to reduce our own stress, to manage this, I guess. And that's what I love about these conversations, obviously, is that there's not a one size fits all, right? We're all different in terms of what works for me might not work for you, or how I manage uncomfortable or stressful situations. As a psychotherapist, are there strategies that you have used with your clients or seen that are more effective?
Because it is such a big, big topic, I always bring it back to basics, Patrick, which is it's all about your thinking. Cognitive behavioral therapy is something which I really think is amazing. I was trained in just humanistic therapy at the beginning, which is counseling, talking to people, which is lovely, but there isn't very much direct activity going on in terms of when you leave, that's it. If you work with a CBT therapist or anyone that along those lines, they will make you do some homework. I need you to start becoming aware of what you are thinking, because we don't realize that how we're thinking is a problem, do we, Patrick? I mean, it took me ages to work out really the way I think is a problem. I love the way I think. And then you get into the therapy, you think, what? I've got thinking bad habits. I've got what? I've got distorted thoughts. I love that statement, thought distortions. It sounds like a science fiction, doesn't it? So it's basically, you're not thinking straight, Joy. You have biases, which you don't realize, and they are due to the way that you've been brought up. Well, your upbringing, everything else, the world around you is influencing you, Joy, and you're coming to a decision about what that means. So we're meaning making machines, Patrick, and we're always doing that. So I've got lots of beliefs which feel absolutely normal, totally different to your beliefs, but my beliefs are better than your beliefs, Patrick, and I'm going to run with it. So I need you to become more aware of what are you thinking in that moment, and then you need to start interrogating the thoughts. So I like, well, most of the words that I have start with a C in the polite way, but you've got to catch that thought. You've got to check it. And I want you to be checking it really for whether it's for its truth or its falseness. So the first thing that you can do to stop that train is this thought true or is it not true? And you can rate it really on the scale of 1 to 10 or percentage, like, yes, there's a line in front of me that's 100% true. Or there's a line in front of me. Actually, it's 0. There is no line. I'm just having my body's just doing its thing, trying to save my life. So you begin to rate that yes and no. And then you can give yourself a chance then to challenge it. So challenging it is beginning to say, well, have there been times when I felt this before? What was the outcome? Or, you know what, that thought's rubbish. No, and you can ditch it at that point. So catching it, you're checking it, and you challenge it. And then that gives you the option for change. So change is where you need to get to, where you need to look at that thought. And I call it having a coin, or you call it a dime, we call it a penny. But there are two sides to it for a good reason. So you want to really be able to have a thought and know that there must be an alternative. That saved my bacon so many times, Patrick. Just the fact that you might be thinking that way, Joy, and you think it's 100% true. But guess what? Got news for you. There's another way to look at this. And that's what you need to go for when, in those moments when your brain has began to shut down, because we've got the prefrontal cortex, the really smart bit, got the middle bit where the emotional seat is, and the emotional brain works faster than the logical brain. It runs circles around it. So you have ideas out there about the monkey mind and all that kind of stuff. So the monkey's interesting, jumping from tree to tree, thought to thought. I get it. But basically panicking without any information. And so really, if the job of our body is to save our lives, Patrick, you want the emotional brain to take over. There's no point me and you sitting here and being all very, lofty and saying, oh, that tiger over there, Patrick, how big do you think it is? Do you think it's had its dinner today? Do you think he's brushed his teeth? No way, Patrick. Come on, please.
So, Joy, I'd just be asking how fast you are, right? Because I just have to outrun you at this point.
Oh, you're so funny. Because you mean I'm going to get eaten and you'll be okay. You're so right, Patrick. I tell you, I will run like Usain Bolt. You won't be able to catch me.
I do think this model has a lot of power to it. And it's one that I use a variation of in terms of the thought record. And you're so right. It starts with our thoughts. That I think of somebody that cuts me off in traffic, and I really have two thoughts. I could think they've done it intentionally, Or I could think maybe it's a student driver or somebody that just sort of has looked inattentively for a moment and it's not intentional, right? But that then creates a cascade, as you say, of where I go next with this, right? If I think it's an accident, I might still be frustrated, but we've all made accidents. But if I think that you did this intentionally, it changes to me. The next thing is, what's my emotion going to be toward you or the event? Yeah.
Absolute rage. And we've got a word over in the UK, you may use it to road rage. So, you're so angry, you chase them down.
Oh, yeah.
Here as well. You try to get back at them. You do all kinds of things. Basically, you want to fight.
In the US, you hear people being shot because of it, right? They pull something.
We don't have guns in the UK.
Yeah, so that is a real... But back to the thought, is it true or untrue, right? The first part is pretty easy for us, especially if we catastrophize things and look for the worst and everything. It's easy for me to think of the evidence that backs up my belief right now. That's why I believe it. It takes more time for us to be able to slow this thing down to say, why isn't this true? Which is what you're talking about. Is there anything in particular that you find is helpful for individuals that are so caught up in their own truth belief in this that it's hard for them to shift to look at it any other way?
I think the emotions are very sensible, Patrick, and the body is meant to be at rest, just in a happy place. So for me, that's my guiding light, my North Star, that Joy, if you're in a good place, you feel content, you're talking to Patrick, you're not worrying about the tigers that might be outside, you're not worried, you're just in a good place. So for me, that place of rage means, or that place of just rightness and righteousness, is an energy that you feel, which is not really calm or content or at rest. So I would get you to question that you need to look at this a different way. And you've got a gigantic brain. You can look at this a different way. In fact, you can look at this in several different ways if you want to. Start thinking about what else could this mean? What else could this mean? Because we're taking it very personally. We're making it mean something about us, that Patrick deliberately set out to cut me up. In fact, I don't even know your name. I just said that person in that car. I probably don't know whether it's male or it's female. I just know that car, that person, I hate them. They cut me up. And I'm thinking, really, Joy? What makes you say that? Well, it's just a guess. So this is where all the knowing that we have thought distortions, we have negative, we have bad thinking habits that don't help us. Knowing that we have black and white thinking, either it's good or it's bad. Either Patrick was being a good, safe driver, he was being a bad driver. He tried to cut me up or he didn't. And then we get into generalizing. We're just got so much information rushing at us, Patrick, that we have to quickly come to some kind of conclusion about it. So generalizing happens. One thing happens, we make pattern. So it's every day on this road, that man in that car, Patrick, he tries to cut me up. Like, really? Well, he did it yesterday. That's my reasoning. The reasoning is that you were there yesterday and you're going to do it again today. And I'm going to keep my eye on you. In fact, today I'm going to get back at you. We'll see who's going to win. So to me, that whole drama that we can get into, when you can feel that drama is an interesting energy, Patrick, I can feel myself getting really energized just thinking about that. But the body is meant to be at rest and calm most of the time. And if I'm not in that state, I'm thinking, well, I've got to question what's happening to me. What am I thinking? And I hear you saying that people think they're right. That's another problem, isn't it? That you think you're right. You have to become more open-minded and know that there are bound to be different views. 10 people in the room, an event happens. Guess what, Patrick? We all describe it differently and we all remember different things. That can't be right, can it? So, even just just being kind to other human beings and to yourself, that, you know what, my ideas and my viewpoints, they feel really real and they feel really true. But you know what? I wonder what Patrick thinks. I'll entertain his thoughts too.
Yeah.
In fact, I might entertain the other person. Let me get a more balanced perspective, because I know it's from my perspective, but let's accept there are other perspectives too. And that's why we have wars, isn't it? That's why people fight. They're fighting for their right to be right.
Yeah. So
doesn't make sense.
We know cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm a firm believer. I think that is a very powerful model for us to use. What other approaches do you find are beneficial or helpful as it relates to stress reduction or managing it? Well,
I think people need to recognize that between the thoughts that go on in their head, which is on top of the shoulder, that head thing, that big, looks like a football. Oh, it's a head, isn't it? And then there's the body. So it's like an iceberg, isn't it, Patrick? That's it 1/10 above the water, and then the other 9/10 below the water, which is our body. So between the body and the head, they talk to each other. When did we forget that? We think everything happens in the, what's the top part of your buildings called, where the penthouse.
Oh, yeah.
Penthouse. Everything happens in the penthouse. Yes. What about the rest of the building, Patrick? So the body and the mind are talking to each other constantly, trying to work out, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And I read something recently that said we say that to ourselves 4 times every second. I can't even break that down because a second seems like a very short time. But imagine if we are going, am I safe? 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 Just the survival instinct is always at play. So we're very vigilant. We're always looking around for danger. And if the body spots it first, i.e. my feet are wet and then my knees are wet, and then do you know what? I think I might be in water. I might be drowning. Do something. If I'm feeling a little bit of heat on my skin, getting a little bit crispy, a little bit too hot, there might be a fire. So my body is very, very much going to say to my brain, Joy, do something. And in reverse, the brain can be looking out for stuff. It can be saying, well, Joy, that person over there, they don't look like you should be I don't think you should be around them, Joy. They look a bit dodgy. Then it will tell the body that I think we need to run, body. Could you get the heart racing for me? Could you just give me a dose of adrenaline so I can really run faster and really focus on getting, it tells the body what to do.
Sure.
So the two parts talk together. People don't realize there's a huge connection between our gut and also the brain. So there's a nerve that runs up our back called the vagus nerve, and it's like the superhighway between the gut, which has so many emotional connections, and then it runs to the brain and it delivers an emotion, and then our brain and our experiences translate that into a feeling. So that's why people get emotions and feelings as words muddled up. But initially, there's just some basic emotions I think there's 8 emotions that we have, and beyond that, they're all kind of variations of. But the body will tell you, this is what we're feeling right now, guys. And the brain is going to interpret it depending on your experiences. And that's the reason why we can both experience something, Patrick, and you will see it one way, I will see it another, because we're working on what happened to me in my childhood that this reminds me of, or what did I read last week that this feels like. We're using everything around us to try and make that thing make sense in that moment.
Yeah. Along those lines, where we're talking about the mind and the body as one, I think as well, what about nutrition and physical exercise? How do you integrate those into stress reduction or management?
Yeah, with exercise, it's probably easier in terms of exercising can get rid of that excess energy that we have. So you can be burning off because when you're stressed, you get a delivery of adrenaline, and what an animal would normally do, they'd run, they'd burn it all off, and they'd go back to normal. So as human beings, we can just kind of be holding it. So the exercise is a bit like going away and just burning that adrenaline off. Exercise generates adrenaline, which gives us a good feeling. So they talk about the runner's high and all that kind of stuff. And I hate exercise. I'll be honest. I'm going to come clean with you, Patrick. I do not like it. Okay. But I know that you can get a lot of good stuff from it. I'm lazy. I've done my exercise in my 20s. I kept my body in good condition for that much time, and it's lasted. Thank God it has lasted, Patrick. But I'm not an exercise person because I never got that runner's high that I was hoping to get. I just got exhausted. So, and on the nutrition side, it's more to do with giving your body the energy that it needs to function properly. So when it comes to, let's say, running and getting away from the animal, you want to have a reasonable amount of sugar in your body because it gets translated into sugar so that you can actually do all the running that you need. But in order to keep the cells working properly, you have to eat properly. So I'm not an expert nutritionist, but they go on about eating properly. And I think it's probably good to eat your greens and get a balanced diet and drink a lot of water. So that makes sense. But it's about the cells and the way in which the cells can degenerate. And especially when it comes to having exhausted yourself with stress, you want to make sure that, I'm going to say that when it comes to burnout, you've got to look after yourself because the cells can begin to shut down because of stress. So again, it's just getting the right vitamins and nutrition, but I'm not an expert on that. I'm a bit like you, Patrick. I know that I'm meant to eat properly, and there is some benefit to eating food because it can change your mood as well. So food and mood, they go together, but
I will tell you this, Joy. I am somebody that I try and run pretty regularly. I exercise regularly, and there's not a day that I've gone out for a run that I'm thinking, this is awesome. I love this. I literally, within a half a mile of being out, I'm like, this sucks. I hate this. I've jokingly told this story many times, and I say there's not a time where I come back from a run. There's a 5K loop that when I leave the house, that I come home, and within an hour of finishing that, I'm not saying, I'm so glad I did that. But there is not one time I have left. I can honestly say that in the decades that I have run, I have ever left the house skipping away thinking, this is great. I love this run right now. I don't. I hate it.
That is so good to hear that, Patrick. But there must be something that motivates you to keep going back every day. There has to be.
Yeah, for me, it's that mental, probably neurochemical release that I get from it that allows me to deal with stress. On the days that I don't work out or run or do something physical, I feel it.
So that's what it is. So kind of like the reward system. So this dopamine that we have as well, which is our reward and achievement system. For you, it's not just the achievement part that's being driven, because it could be like, I'm going to win a medal for running, but it's more to do with, if I don't do this, then I feel lousy. So that's the payoff for you, isn't it?
Yeah, without
Your
question.
body remembers it. Yeah, it's great. I'm glad I met someone who does not like exercise, but you're better than me, Patrick, because you actually do it. I like chocolate too much and stuff,
Well,
and
maybe that's the other reason, Joy. I have one last question for you, and I'm curious how you find this impacts our level of stress since COVID, which is when you wrote the book. Isolation.
Yes, isolation what was a big thing, wasn't it? We were all confined to four walls at one point and not being able to go out. What happened, I think, was that we stopped doing the things that made us happy. So the activities that made us happy, that kind of stopped. And a lot of that was around friendship groups. So human beings do need other human beings. I think the lack of being able to talk to your best friends and see your friends, we didn't realize the importance of it. Even the people at work that you might not like, you begin to miss them. Oh, I miss that person that I can't stand. I just miss not liking them. You just miss people. And then I think human beings are meant to connect. So it's lovely if you perhaps had people inside the four walls that you were stuck in to talk to. Hopefully people that you liked, at least you could talk to someone. But a lot of people don't live with other people. When you leave home, you're on your own. You do spend time with your friends. You go out of your house to spend time with your friends. So when we were confined, I think it was loneliness that kicked in and lack of proper eye contact, body contact, just a smile or the laugh or all the things that they're probably like just these micro movements that really make human beings feel loved and wanted. So no oxytocin, that lovely hormone, was being generated from being hugged. I mean, the worst thing I think for me, Patrick, was not being able to hug people. I'd never really thought about it before, but hugging in and of itself generates oxytocin, which is why we do it. That's why we do it. So that was completely missing. We've just got really miserable for very sensible reasons, lack of human contact.
It's interesting. I remember when people were saying, oh, the handshake, nobody will shake hands again, and the hug is gone. I'm thinking, you don't wipe away thousands of years of evolution in terms of how we connect with one virus. That's just not going to happen. We are not people that cannot hug or show connection to other people in handshakes. And we're seeing that now. That I'm sure there are still some people out there that are like, no, I'm not going to shake hands or I'm not hugging people. But by and large, I don't see that anymore. And I think the reason you just mentioned, it's a drive that we have to connect. And from the stress component, as I think about it, I think it's something along the lines of a problem shared is a problem halved. Right. And Absolutely. That by being connected to people, I do think that does impact or lower our level of stress when we're connected with other people to share our burdens.
And it's interesting, that whole thing about the connection thing, the hugs and the handshakes. And I must have read something recently that really, if we're going back to a real tribal system, if I met you and you were from a different tribe, Patrick, and I couldn't shake your hand to try and suss out who you were or whether you were a good guy or a bad guy, I'd have to just come to the conclusion that you're the enemy and we'd have to fight. And I would fight and I'd probably win, Patrick. No, you go for 5K runs. Perhaps you'd win. Yeah. Okay, you win.
It's so true, though. I mean, that we need that. We need that.
We're sussing each other out all of the time because the truth is we could all be potentially dangerous to each other. So we have to get to the point where we can relax. So I meet you and I shake your hand and I notice that you're okay, and then I can chill.
Yeah. Which was the reason why people shook hands, right? Was to make sure, be able to see that there wasn't anything up their sleeve, so to speak. And my understanding is that's why when people entered somebody's home, taking your hat off was the same gesture to make sure there's nothing under this helmet or whatever I'm wearing that could be a threat to you.
We are so suspicious, aren't we? But rightly so, rightly so. I mean, even though we are top of the food chain and we're very, very smart, we're very, very fragile too. And we have this skin, which is pretty pathetic compared to the fur mane of a lion or the hide of an elephant, you know. It's very, very, very delicate stuff. But that's what makes us connect. The skin is where we get the transfer of information, isn't it? That's why it's so thin, but it's also very, very easy to like destroy. And all of our gubbins, the insides will all fall out. But that's a really sick thing. I must watch too much sci-fi films.
Joy, I'm telling you right now, you just told me a minute ago that you thought you could take me. So if you were coming into my house, I'd be asking you to take your hat off and I'd be shaking both of your hands because now I'm concerned.
You're so funny, Patrick. You can shake both my hands. I'm going to think you're really weird. Really weird. I'm going to think this is something that they do in the USA, isn't it? They shake both hands. Okay, I'll just go with it.
Only when they're threatened.
I'll just go with it.
Only when they're threatened. Joy, listen, thank you so much for this conversation. I really have appreciated your thoughts in this area. If people want to get your book, what's the best way to go about doing that? And it'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, that's great. And it should be in most good bookshops, but Amazon, not really, don't want to plug them, but they do have everything. So on there, so it's Karen, so it's under my first name, Joy Langley, and it's Navigating Stress. Go to Amazon. I mentioned the word Karen because I have two names. Karen Joy is my full name, but that book is written under Joy Langley. So you'll find it. I have a website, which is joylangley.com. You can't miss that one. That's pretty easy. And you'll find a link on there as well for the book. And yeah, definitely be in your show notes for sure.
Yeah. Joy, thanks so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure, Patrick. And it's been fun having you. And I'm going to have to up my game now when it comes to exercise, because I tell you, I'm not going to let you beat me in that 5K run.
This is now recorded. So
game on.
Play this back to you.
Game on.
Enjoy. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.